You're listening to the Secret Muse Society, where we pull out the things we keep hidden about ourselves. What are the secrets that actually hold us back from the connection we crave? And what happens when we tap into the inspiration we have to offer the world? I'm your host, authenticity coach, Karen Choi. Let's dive in together. Hello, Muse. Welcome back to episode 23 of the Secret Muse Society podcast. This is part 2 of exploring the question of, are you an internal processor or an external processor? Do you think to talk or talk to think? Are you an innie or an outie? And where I left you off in episode 22 is basically we covered, what makes an internal processor? What are the signs that you're an internal processor? And what are some tips to help you communicate better and get what you need as an internal processor? And the same went for an external processor. And I told you a little story about how I came to this way of understanding ourselves through a conversation with my friend Peter, and how he is writing a book, and he's a very articulate and expressive man who always thought he was an internal processor. And I always thought he was an external processor who consciously moved in the world as an external processor through his creative process. It was his way of connecting with people. And it was just so interesting to me that he did not know about this about himself. And it got me thinking, what if using this knowledge, we can intentionally start what I was saying about using it to connect with people deeper, to communicate, to come across the way we want to create safe environments for ourselves to be vulnerable, to get the clarity that we really are seeking so that we can move forward and keep the forward momentum towards our goals and becoming who we are. This came to this now obsession of, are we an internal processor, an external processor, and how we can use this knowledge, this awareness to our advantage. So in this second part, I'm going to talk to you about, what if now is the time to try something different? Okay, so you've been an internal or an external process for most of your life, right? Like coming back to the question of, when you were a kid in school, were you the one who always raised your hand and was willing to talk it out? Or were you the kid who needed to take in the information by yourself and then raise your hand the next day? Or perhaps you wouldn't raise your hand. You were just happy knowing what you knew. Now, as we are adults, what if the external processor started using more internal processing systems? And what if the internal processor started using external processing systems? And the reason for this isn't just out of a whim and an experiment, although this is something that I am intentionally embracing, experimentation as a way to move away from perfectionism, as a way to actually speed up growth. Like when you listen to a lot of the thought leaders out there, they say that the people who make the most mistakes actually get to where they want to go faster because they are churning that learning wheel way faster instead of sitting on something and waiting to see what they can learn from not taking action to taking action repeatedly, consistently over and over again so that you could really figure out what works for you. So if the goal of thinking and processing, if our objective of activities is to gain clarity in the most efficient way, so as fast and effective as possible, I want you to look at, is external processing doing that for you? If you're an external processor, does talking it out in the moment in order to think things through, is that the fastest and most effective way for you to get from point A of present moment, taking in the information, to B, having a clear idea of, that thought, that feeling, that idea, that issue? Does external processing get you clarity the fastest and most effective way? And same goes for the internal processor. Does thinking by yourself, perhaps writing, and, just being inside your own head, sorting things out, does that get you from point A to point B of clarity the fastest and most effective way? So I'm going to give you an example of myself because I know myself best. And the reason why I'm so excited about this topic and exploring this with you is because it has illuminated so many aha moments for me and the goals that I have set for my life. So I have always identified as an internal processor, whether I knew it or not, like whether I had the terminology or not. I always thought that my best way of sorting through my thoughts and feelings, understanding ideas, getting to the root of certain issues, just taking information and processing it through my mind and my body, I always thought that I did it best by myself. So for example, in a conversation, I would show up more as the listener. I would probably be really quiet and I wouldn't share my opinion because in my mind, I believed I needed to take in the information first and then be with it by myself for a while before I could come back with something to say about it. Now that I have looked at the definition of external processing and internal processing from the objective of clarity, fast and effective, I look back and realize, oh my gosh, I have been doing it the slow way. In fact, I have been using internal processing as a preference, and this preference isn't actually my best way. Okay, let me clarify. So preference is something I was just more comfortable with doing. So for example, when I would sit quietly and listening in a conversation, I was more comfortable doing that because I was actually scared of saying the wrong thing or saying something that I would regret, or I didn't actually have a word in the moment to express my feeling, or I was afraid that I might offend someone if I were to offer a different opinion, or I was afraid that I couldn't articulate it clear enough, or that the other person would think I was stupid, or that I was incompetent, or all that fear around how other people perceived me in communicating in the moment is actually what created the preference of staying quiet. Here's another way I had stayed quiet as a preference. So one of the signs of external processing is that when you need to think through something, your first inclination is to look outward, to look for somebody to talk it with you. And I think that I had developed a process for thinking by myself because I actually was too scared to ask somebody to think it out with me. You see how that preference was created? And not my parents' fault. They were very busy as immigrant parents when we were growing up. They were working hard to provide for us and to build their own careers and business. So I didn't always have somebody around to talk with me, to ask me questions. How are you feeling? To say, what do you think about that? What did you learn from that? Like I didn't have someone close in my life, a mentor, a parent, even a relative to sit with me and help me process my thoughts and feelings. So I think that preference developed as a matter of my environment, which led me to think internal processors. Are you internal processing as a preference or as a product of your environment? And that environment is an internal environment and an external environment, right? Like the internal fear of what people would think of you or the external lack of resources, to be frank. So now that I realize, I have been internal processing as a preference, which then became a habit, right? It became something I did over and over again, which became a pattern. And through that pattern, I became very skilled at listening, at trying to sort out my thoughts in my own head, at turning inward and being by myself. I had developed those skills. Those skills, I do not regret. They have become my superpowers and have helped me to come to where I am today as a coach and helping others by listening to them, by asking them questions, by pulling and navigating through the jumbled thoughts and feelings in their mind to help them get clarity on ideas and issues. That has become my skill and a superpower. At the same time, is it the way, the process that gets me my own personal clarity the fastest and most effective way? Is it my most efficient way to get from point A of unclarity to point B of clarity? It isn't. It isn't. And that's actually why I became a coach, because when I worked with my therapist, when I worked with my coach, and I was able to sit down and talk through really things that were in my head, and I didn't have words to express my feelings and these issues that were happening around, like, in order to navigate it, in my head, it was all jumbled. But by talking with somebody, now I realize it's like pulling out all the different things. So for example, I realized that all my life living as an internal processor, it looked kind of like this. I'm a teenager sitting on the floor in the middle of her bedroom after pulling out all the clothes from her drawers and her closet and trying to sort it out enclosed in the bedroom, just like moving things from pile to pile, but never really getting organized, never really knowing what to wear, what to throw out, what to keep. It was just a mess. That was internal processing for me. But now when I look back at the times that I've worked with a therapist, worked with a coach, talk with my husband, talk with my friends, have talked with a mentor, had the courage to vulnerably talk through things without having fully formed thoughts yet, and stumbling over the words, being inarticulate, and just like kind of stuttering and fumbling. It was messy. Truth is, when I process that way externally, it's more like the teenager opening up her bedroom door and lining up some bins in the hallway and pulling the clothes from the piles of her bed and throwing things into each of the bins. What is she giving away? What is she donating? And then the pile on the bed, being able to fold it nicely and sort it of the things that she's keeping. And in this process, also coming up with a really cool outfit. What do you think of this analogy? This metaphor is showing that by opening up the door, talking to someone, pulling ideas out so I could see them, see all the different categories, just get some clarity of what I was dealing with, that actually helped me get the clarity faster. Is this resonating for you? Because what I'm offering here is, obviously, if you've always been living as an internal processor because of preferences, maybe you want to consider trying external processing because it actually helps you get clarity faster. Think about all the times in which you were in conversation with somebody else and they asked you a question about something you had never considered before, and you were forced in that moment to really think and express what was happening. You felt safe enough to just say what was coming up, and you weren't judging it because you knew that they were neutral and they were keeping their biases and assumptions at bay. And their only objective in that moment also was to just understand and hear you out in that moment. Did you have an aha moment? Did you have huge light bulbs go off and realize, and it's because you pulled it out of yourself. And you could hear it for yourself. External processors, we also need to write things down so we can see our ideas. Or, for example, for me, I realized that I have been internal processing all this time in my life, but I had this deep, deep desire to create, to actually share my story, to actually speak my mind, to tell people how I feel about things, to actually put an opinion out there, like stand for something, or to help to navigate through an issue by offering my perspective. I have always had that internal desire and craving to participate and engage in conversation and in society's collective, bigger conversations also. But I went inward. I tried to sort it out, but I never actually attained clarity. And so when it came to those conversations later, when I had an opportunity to speak up, I had nothing to draw on Because now looking back, hindsight is 2020, I realized I actually didn't get clear. Ha! Bing bong. But now through the process of this podcast, this podcast actually is a product of that desire to share what I think, feel, to express new ideas, to put those ideas out there, to really weave through issues and see what we can find. This is a product of that really innate desire. Thing is, I was going about it all wrong. Like, here's another example. You can sign up if you haven't already. I write a weekly love letter called Muse in the Middle. And I always thought that, if I write things down in my journal, I'll jot down an idea and then it will become clear. But not until I jot down that idea and want to expand on it, not for myself, but so I can communicate it with somebody else. That's when that idea gets clearer. It's me actually sorting it out so I can communicate it to another person, not communicate it to myself. If I keep it to myself, it stays jumbled in my head. But if I have to say it to somebody else, it becomes more clearer and it becomes clearer faster. So that newsletter is part of my now external processing. It is now a conduit. It is a way that I can share my ideas in a moment that is not fully formed, and that being okay. Same with this podcast. I used to sit down and try to write every word for word. So I was internally processing. I was taking time to write down exactly what I wanted to say in advance, and then I would record it by just reading it. But that process of writing it down was taking so long. And I thought all this time that it was a perfectionist tendency, which, yes, I recognize it as a form of perfectionism because I wanted it to be perfect. And perhaps that is one of the reasons why internal processing doesn't work for me, is because I end up staying in that perfectionist loop and all the information ends up just circling within my head. But once I decided with this podcast to just come out and say what I want to say and let it flow into areas that I hadn't planned out, to say words that I don't know if I'm going to regret later, but being okay with it. Getting into that process has allowed me to actually expand on ideas and get more clear of where I stand and what I think and believe. That wasn't done intentionally. This podcast was created in this way as an intention to, it was an anti-perfectionist movement just to come out and fumble through my words. That was me embracing anti-perfectionism. But now I'm also seeing it as, now I can give myself permission to express myself on the fly, even though I might not have the best words to articulate my thoughts and feelings. I may not have fully expanded or formed my ideas. I may not really understand a full breadth of an issue. I don't have all the information, but that's okay. And that's why I want to say thank you to you, Muse, for being here, because you are holding that safety for me. Through this podcast, I can come here and tell you what's on my mind and record it and let this energy come out. Externally process. For you, it's kind of one way right now because you can't necessarily just jump in and tell me what you think. So it's giving me the opportunity to really just talk all the way through and around and weave over and under all kinds of different things so that I can have some clarity around these ideas. And I want to thank you for your open-mindedness and for coming into these podcast episodes with me. We're just hanging out and we're just talking. There is no, agenda, really, super set agenda. Well, I'm not coming with a set of things that I want to say, and that being okay. And you knowing that I'm going to come and I'm just going to talk and it's not going to sound super articulate. And guess what? This is where I think that internal processing all my life has kind of held me back, is that if I had been extra comfortably external processing all my life, I might actually be at a point where I could articulate my thoughts and feelings and ideas and issues without stumbling over my words so much. I might have more confidence. Public speaking might come easier if I had been practicing all that time. And another way that I think that internal processing has held me back is that it kept me in that perfectionist loop of thinking I had to show up in a certain way. I actually judged a lot of people based on their performance. So when you think about internal processing and external processing, I had always assumed that an external processor performed really well in meetings and in presentations, that they just knew exactly what to say and how to say it. And that was just natural to them. Now, when I look at it as an external and processor, yes, maybe that external processor is really good at articulating the things that they're saying because they've been practicing it for so long. But also maybe that person who's speaking right now is an internal processor. They have given themselves the time to jot down their thoughts in notes. They have decided which points they really want to make clear in that presentation. And so all that preparation actually set them up to present themselves externally in a very polished and easefully way. So it's not necessarily how you perform that sets you up as an external or internal processor. That's just maybe a result of choosing the thing that was right for you. Doesn't that kind of blow your mind? It blows my mind. And I think it's changing everything. I want to dive into this more with you as time goes on. And I really am curious, what questions do you have about internal processing or external processing? Do you know how you operate? Does it work best for you? And what would it be like to try the different way? What kind of fear would you have to overcome? What courage would you have to find within yourself to step out of your comfort zone? This is not comfortable for me for I keep saying stumbling and fumbling over my words because it feels like that to me. I guess because I'm having those thoughts that, oh, Karen, you are just forming these thoughts as you go. So it's going to be messy and it's going to be awful. But maybe it's that thought that is creating that anxiety in me, and that anxiety that gets me all tongue-tied. And then that tongue-tied is what you hear. Perhaps this is an episode to follow, is looking at our internal processing system now that we're looking at it from an outside point of view, how we identify what are our preferences, what might work better for us, what really gets us to clarity the fastest and most effective way. Perhaps the next episode really is to explore, what is the internal processing system, whether you're an internal or an external processor, so you can use it as a tool to get the results you want. So for example, and again, I'm sorry for using myself as the prime example, but I know myself best. And in the last 3 years, my focus really has been about connecting to myself so I can connect deeper and closer with the people I love. That being my husband, my kids, my family, my parents, my friends, you, collaborators. I just really want to connect with people. And so understanding myself better and how I have to connect with me in order to connect with you. I have to communicate with myself in order to communicate with others. This has all been a very adventurous time of exploring and discovering new things, and a lot of changing too. And so if you are in this process with yourself where you want connection to yourself and the greater world, that to me is spirituality. I invite you to think about the areas where you want to connect more, where you want to be a better communicator, because communication is where we connect, where you want to connect with people through creativity. Perhaps you want to connect with the greater world. You want to connect with future generations through a legacy that you are going to leave. However you want to connect with your life right now. Think about areas and think about what you need to know about yourself in order to do that. And hey, if you are an internal processor or an external processor, and you need help with that process, as a coach, I love that. It's like my favorite thing to do is not just as a coach, but as a human, is helping you helping people understand themselves better so they can understand their world, so they can understand each other better, so they can know what they want, know what they need, and go and get it. I really believe that, the saying that Maya Angelou says, when you know better, you do better. Well, I kind of put my own twist on it and say, when you know you better, you do you better. So if your goal is to live a more authentic life, you really need to know yourself better. I'll leave you with one last thing. Albert Einstein says that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So this is where I'm at when it comes to internal processing and external processing. If you're tired of hitting your head against the wall because you feel like you're not getting your voice across the way that you want, or you are not getting the clarity that you want, or that you don't see the results in your life that you want or expect, I challenge you to consider, can you think about it in a different way? Can you do it in a different way? Are you an internal processor who actually needs to start external processing more? Or are you an external processor who needs to start external processing more? I think that's a lot to chew on. So I hope that this is helpful for you. This is super fun for me. And let me know what you think. I invite you to find me on Instagram, send me a DM. Let's continue this conversation and let me know how this helped you. Let me know what shifts are going on for you now that you've identified that you are an internal or external processor, innie or outie. And until next time, Muse, have an awesome day. Try new things. Be you, but push yourself outside of you, because I believe that's when you become the bigger you. Be in love, be in joy, be inspired. I love you. Thank you for listening to the Secret Muse Society. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts to rate and review this podcast so other modern muses like you can find us too. I invite you to continue the conversation and connect with me on Instagram at KarenChoi.co. Join me next week for more secrets inspired by you. I'm Karen Choi. Until next time, stay gold.